Michael had never been close to his Uncle Frank, but when the call came about his sudden death, something inside him felt heavy. He hadn't seen him in almost 3 years since before college, but memories of awkward family dinners and long silences over coffee came back like smoke. Frank had always been a quiet man, strange but never unkind. He lived alone in a little old house on the edge of town and barely used his phone. Most of the family didn't talk to him much. Some even joked that he was already halfway gone before. He died, but death has a way of forcing people to show up, and so Michael did. The funeral took place on a gray Friday afternoon in late October. The sky was a sheet of cold steel, and a wind had picked up that bit through jackets and made people keep their heads down. The church was small and made of old stone, the kind you see in horror movies, with thick wooden doors and stained glass. Windows that looked like faded bruises in the pale light. It smelled like dust and incense, and the walls seemed to press in just a little too close. Inside, the room was filled with low murmurs and the soft rustling of tissues. The casket set. At the front, closed at first, then opened briefly during the viewing. Michael stood near the back, watching quietly, trying not to feel too out of place. He wasn't sure what to feel. Guilt? Sadness? Mostly, he just felt cold. His parents weren't there. They were stuck overseas dealing with visa issues, and Michael had come alone. After the service, most of the extended family and a few old friends made their way to the reception down the road. But as Michael stepped outside, he realized he didn't have his phone. He patted his pockets once then, again with more urgency. He remembered setting it down on the seat near the front during the viewing, just before he leaned in to say a quiet goodbye to Uncle Frank. He hesitated, looking over his shoulder. The church was mostly empty now. The last few cars were rolling out of the gravel parking lot, crunching stones beneath their tires. The wind picked up again, colder than before, and something about the silence that followed made Michael's skin crawl. But he turned back anyway. Inside, the building felt different. Not just quiet dead. The kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. Michael walked down the aisle, his shoes echoing off the stone floor. The casket was still there, open now, but the chairs were all pushed back. He could see his phone sitting right where he'd left it, on the pew beside the flowers. He walked slowly, trying not to look too long at the casket, but his eyes were drawn to it anyway. Uncle Frank's face was pale, a little sunken, like wax left in the sun. His hands were folded neatly on his chest, and his suit looked a size too big. As Michael reached for his phone, he heard something. A faint creak, like wood shifting under weight. He turned, expecting to see someone behind him, maybe a janitor, or one of the funeral staff. But the room was empty. The pews stood in neat, silent rows. The tall windows barely let in any light. He looked back at the casket, and that's when he noticed it. Frank's mouth was open. Not wide, but enough. A few inches. Just enough to make. It looked like he was whispering something or gasping for breath. Michael's heart skipped. He could have sworn it had been closed before. Not just his memory, he remembered clearly seeing how peaceful and still Frank had looked. Mouth shut, eyes closed, hands folded. This wasn't right. He stared at the face for a long moment, not moving, not breathing. Then, with a deep breath, he grabbed his phone and backed away. Just as he turned to leave, the lights above flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. It could have been nothing, old wiring, faulty bulbs, but it added a layer of unease that made Michael's skin prickle. The hallway to the exit felt longer than before, the air colder. His footsteps seemed too loud. The exit sign at the far end of the hall buzzed faintly, and as he pushed the door open and stepped outside, the heavy wood slammed behind him with a sound that echoed down the empty street. Michael didn't look back. But even as he got into his car and drove away, The image of Frank's face wouldn't leave him alone. That open mouth. That stillness. That moment that felt like something had changed, like the body wasn't just a body anymore. He tried to shake it off. Told himself it was stress, imagination, the kind of thing people don't talk about after funerals. But deep down, something felt wrong. Not just with what he saw, but with the way the silence had felt inside that church. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't quiet. It had felt ... watch ... asterisk. Michael spent the drive home trying to convince himself that nothing had happened, that what he'd seen in the funeral home was just grief messing with his head. He hadn't eaten much all day, and the cold church, the strange lighting, and the emotional weight of the funeral could all explain what he thought he saw. But the image of Uncle Frank's mouth, slightly open, slack, unnatural, kept replaying. In his mind, like a looping video, he couldn't pause. The more he tried to forget it, the clearer it became. He didn't even realize he'd been clenching the steering wheel until he parked outside his uncle's house and felt his fingers aching. He had volunteered to stay overnight and help clear out some of Frank's belongings over the weekend. There was no one else in the family eager to do it, and since Michael was already in town, it made sense. At least that's what he told himself. But the house felt colder than he remembered, darker, even in the late afternoon light. It had been locked since Frank's death, and everything inside was exactly the way he left it, coat still hanging by the door, slippers neatly placed near the couch, an unfinished cup of coffee in the kitchen, now dried and brown at the edges. That night, the silence was different. The kind that presses against your ears, not letting any noise in or out. Michael wandered from room to room, turning on lights, opening drawers, looking for something, anything to distract him. But his mind kept drifting back to the church, to that moment in the hallway when the lights had flickered, to the sound of the creaking wood, and especially to the voice he thought he'd heard. He hadn't told anyone about it, not even his friends. It felt too strange to say out loud. A whisper that came from an empty room. A phrase that didn't belong. "Why'd you leave me here?" It didn't make sense. Frank was dead. Michael had no reason to feel guilty. He hadn't even been that close to him. But something in that voice, something distorted and low, had wrapped itself around his thoughts like vines. The next morning, he returned to the funeral home. He told himself he'd left something behind his jacket, maybe, but really, he just wanted to see it again. To prove to himself that it was normal, that nothing was out of place. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the sky had turned a shade of gray that felt permanent. Inside, the lights buzzed softly, and the air was thick with the scent of artificial flowers and wood polish. The receptionist looked surprised to see him, but said nothing as he walked down the same hallway from the day before. This time, the viewing room was empty. The casket was gone, replaced by rows of folding chairs and a bare altar. He told himself to leave, but his feet moved on their own, slowly leading him toward the hallway that branched off to the side rooms. The farther he walked, the colder the air became. Not the kind of cold from air conditioning. This was damp, like a basement or a cellar. The smell changed too. Less like flowers, more like soil. Earthy, stale. He passed a door on the left that was cracked open just an inch. He hesitated. Then he heard it again. A cough, faint, wet, ragged. He froze. It came from the room just ahead. He should have left. Every part of his body told him to walk away. But something made him stay. Curiosity, fear, or maybe something deeper. He stepped closer. The hallway lights flickered again, casting long shadows on the floor. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorframe. He whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Then, from within the darkness of the room, the same voice as yesterday, low and broken, whispered again, "Why'd you leave me here?" Michael stepped back, heart pounding. There was no one in the room. He could see clearly now, just chairs stacked against the wall, a small sink, and a mirror cracked across the middle. But no people, no movement, no life. He stared for a moment, longer, then turned and hurried back down the hall. He didn't run, but every step felt like it echoed tenfold in that narrow space. As he reached the front door, the overhead lights dimmed again. He didn't stop to question it this time. He shoved the door open and stepped into the cold air, pulling it shut behind him with more force than he meant. The wind hit him like a slap, but it felt almost comforting, real, alive. He stood on the steps, trying to calm his breathing, feeling like he'd stepped out of a nightmare and back into reality. But something followed him out. He couldn't explain it, but the weight of the air seemed to press against his back, like a stare he couldn't see but could feel. Later that night, while lying in bed at Frank's house, Michael thought about what he'd heard. He told himself it was in his head. Maybe he'd just replayed the voice from yesterday in his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, the voice didn't sound like his uncle. It didn't even sound fully human. There was something wrong about it, something hollow, like it came from beneath the earth. And as he drifted off to sleep, the silence in the house shifted again. A floorboard creaked. A shadow passed by the hallway light. Michael closed his eyes tight, but somewhere in the stillness, just for a second, he thought he heard someone breathing. Michael didn't tell anyone what he heard at the funeral home. Not his friends, not his extended family, not even the woman at the front desk who had smiled at him politely when he left in a rush. He just kept it buried like his uncle now was, but the memory followed him back to the house. That whisper, the coughing, the cold in that hallway, it stuck to him like fog that wouldn't lift. That night, as he lay in Frank's old bed surrounded by old books, old clothes, and a stale kind of silence, he tried to convince himself it had all been grief and stress. He'd been alone too long, thinking too much, that was all. Still, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should have been, and every little creak in the floorboards made him flinch. He eventually fell asleep around 2 a.m., but it wasn't restful. His dreams were thick and strange shapes standing at the foot of his bed, voices whispering things he couldn't quite make out, a dark hallway that stretched endlessly with a casket at the end and something waiting inside it, breathing. He woke up drenched in sweat and with no memory of what he'd dreamed, just a lingering feeling of dread that clung to his skin like a second layer. Wanting to distract himself, he started cleaning out Frank's closet. The room smelled like old paper and mothballs. Most of the clothes were jackets, work boots, worn-out sweaters, nothing strange. But in the back corner, half buried under a stack of yellowed newspapers, he found a small wooden box. It was locked with a latch, but not very tightly. Inside were several funeral programs, some very old, others more recent. Most were for people Michael didn't know, but the one on top made his heart stop for a second. It was for Frank, but the date was wrong. Michael stared at it for a long time. The funeral service was listed as June 21, 2019. That couldn't be right. The funeral had taken place on June 20th. He was sure of it. It had been Friday. The program even had a photo of Frank on it, an old one where he looked almost alive, smiling in a way Michael had never seen. At first, he assumed it was just a typo. People make mistakes. But when he turned the paper over, there was a single line written on the back in shaky, uneven handwriting. "One more night before the earth takes me." Michael dropped the program and slammed the box shut. He couldn't explain it, but something about that message felt personal, almost like it was meant for him. The idea that someone Frank, maybe, had written that made his stomach turn. What did it mean? One more night? Before burial? Before something else? Later that evening, Michael tried to forget about it. He cooked dinner and watched old reruns. on the living room TV, pretending that everything was fine. Around midnight, he finally crawled back into bed, phone beside him, hallway lights still on. He didn't trust the dark anymore. But what happened that night was something he still couldn't explain, something that made him move out of town within weeks. He woke up, or thought he did. At around 3:12 a.m., everything looked wrong. Not terrifying, just ... off. The walls were darker, the air thicker. The hallway light outside his room had gone out, though he hadn't touched it. At the foot of the bed, a figure stood perfectly still. Tall, thin, face pale and gray. Michael didn't move. He couldn't. His chest felt heavy, like something was sitting on it. The figure didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't even breathe, but somehow Michael knew who it was. Uncle Frank. But his face wasn't right. His mouth hung open just like it had in the casket, too wide, too slack, like it had unhinged. His eyes looked sunken, almost gone, just two dark pits and a pale mask. Then, slowly, the figure whispered, "You shouldn't have left me." Michael jolted awake for real this time, gasping for breath, heart hammering against his ribs. The room was normal again, the hallway light back on, no figure, no whisper, just silence. But when he sat up and looked toward the door, his blood went cold. There were muddy footprints on the hardwood floor, leading from the hallway, stopping right next to his bed, and then nowhere. No retreating prints. No signs of where they had come from. Just a trail of wet, earthy steps, as if someone or something had been standing there, watching him in his sleep. He got out of the house the next morning and spent the day driving aimlessly, just trying to clear his head. He called a friend and stayed with them that night, not telling them the real reason. All he said was that the house felt weird. But even with people around, even in a normal apartment with normal lights and sounds, Michael couldn't shake the feeling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that figure, that mouth, that stare. And worse, he kept hearing that same voice in his head over and over, not yelling, just whispering. One more night. Michael didn't sleep the next night either, even surrounded by the safety of a friend's apartment. With music playing softly in the background and the warm glow of a hallway lamp seeping under the door, he couldn't close his eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. Every time he drifted off, the dream came back. Uncle Frank, standing at the foot of the bed, mouth wide, voice cracking like dry wood. One more night. By morning, Michael looked hollow. His eyes were bloodshot, hands trembling from caffeine and exhaustion. He couldn't keep doing this. He had to go back to the house, back to where it started. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was insane. But something inside him said this thing wouldn't stop following him until he faced it head on. Whatever it was, he returned to the house just before sunset. The sky was bruised purple and orange, and the trees around the property were still and quiet. No birds, no wind. Just a thick, heavy silence that settled over everything like dust. As he stepped inside, the air hit him like a wall, stale, damp, almost sour, like wet earth and old wood. Everything was just as he left it. Lights off, bed unmade, footprints still faintly visible on the hardwood floor. He walked slowly, checking each room, calling out his uncle's name, once not expecting a reply, but almost hoping he'd get one. Nothing. The sun dipped below the trees. Shadows grew long, stretching across the carpet like fingers. Michael didn't turn on any lights. Something told him this needed to happen in the dark. He sat down in the living room, facing the hallway, phone in hand but not recording. It didn't feel like the kind of thing you could capture on a screen. This wasn't something the camera would pick up. This was older. Deeper. Hours passed. The silence grew louder. The air thickened. And then, just after midnight, he heard the first sound. A single creak. It came from the hallway near the bedroom. Then another. Slowly, like someone walking barefoot across the wood, dragging their heels slightly. Michael didn't move. He felt frozen in place, pulse hammering in his ears. Then came the whisper, faint but unmistakable, from somewhere just beyond the corner. One more night before the earth takes me. He stood up slowly, heart slamming against his ribs. He turned toward the sound, and there, standing just barely visible in the dimness of the hall, was the same figure from his dreams. Uncle Frank. Same gray skin, sunken eyes, mouth hanging too wide. Except now, he was moving, shuffling forward. One slow step at a time. Michael backed away, but the figure stopped. It tilted its head, not menacingly, but almost curious, like it was trying to understand him. And then it whispered. Again, I waited. Michael tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. He swallowed hard, then said in a shaky voice, "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer right away. It just stood there, staring. Then slowly it raised one hand and pointed toward the back of the house, toward the basement. Michael turned his head, following the gesture. The basement door was closed. He hadn't opened it since arriving. He looked back, but the hallway was empty. The figure was gone. The air suddenly felt heavier, compelled by something he couldn't explain. Michael walked to the basement door. His hand trembled on the knob. He opened it slowly, revealing the steep, narrow staircase beneath. The air that rose up was cold and earthy, like freshly dug soil. Step by step, he descended, flashlight from his phone guiding the way. The basement was small and mostly empty concrete floors, unfinished walls, a few old shelves and boxes. But in the far corner, something caught his eye. A square of dirt. In the floor, different from the rest, looser, recently disturbed. He knelt, brushing the surface with his hand. And then, buried just a few inches deep, he found it. A small wooden box, almost identical to the one upstairs, but older, wetter. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was another funeral program. This one had his name on it. Michael stared at it, breath caught in his throat. The date listed was tomorrow. The air shifted behind him. He turned around slowly, and there, standing in the shadows, was Frank. Closer now, face clearer. But the mouth wasn't open anymore. It was stitched shut with dark thread. Only the eyes moved, wide and pleading. Michael stumbled back, box clutched in his hands. Frank didn't follow. He just pointed again, this time to the ceiling, to the house. To upstairs. Michael fled. He didn't remember getting to the car. Didn't remember starting it. But he drove, fast, as if something was behind him the whole way. He didn't look back until he reached the city. He didn't go back to the house, ever. Weeks passed. He tried to pretend it was over. That maybe. It was just some horrifying hallucination. Sleep deprivation, guilt, some undiagnosed mental break. But every now and then, when the night is quiet, and the air turns just a little too cold, he dreams of Frank again. Still stitched. Still pointing. And every time he wakes up, the clock reads the same. 3:12 a.m. Exactly 1 minute later than the night before.